This MOOPIL series of Texas A&M University is provided through Project LISTO. Literacy-infused science using technology innovation opportunities. The video series is comprised of experts in the field talking about their research while making important contributions to the art of teaching in the K-12 environment. Project LISTO is funded through a competitive I-3 grant from the U.S. Department of Education Investing in Innovation program. The LISTO project is a collaboration among the Center for Research and Development in Dual Language and Literacy Acquisition, Education Leadership Research Center, and Aggie STEM.
Hi, I'm Joanne Olson. I'm a former middle school and elementary school science teacher, and I am currently a professor of science education at Texas A&M University. My research interests lie in effective science teaching practices and science teacher education. Today I'm going to talk about the construct of STEM, what we're seeing as teachers in schools implement STEM, and what teachers can do to avoid the most common pitfalls that occur when doing STEM so that these subjects are taught well. The acronym STEM seems to be everywhere these days, but what is STEM? And so put briefly, STEM is an acronym that stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. But what does that mean in practice? Those are two completely different things. What we've seen is that STEM means many different things to different people. So for instance, policymakers tend to view STEM in terms of a workforce pipeline. So how many people are pursuing majors and getting jobs in areas of science, technology, engineering, and math. Others see STEM as a call to strengthen the teaching of those subjects in K-12 schools. Still others see STEM as a call to add more of what we used to call vocational education or career and technical education in schools. And so what we see this look like is the addition of maker spaces, robotics labs, fabrication labs, and other sorts of activities in the school day. Still others view STEM as a call to integrate. And they're saying that within a classroom, you should be integrating 2 of these disciplines, 3, or even all 4 simultaneously. So these are all really different definitions of STEM. Many states in the United States now have science standards that require the inclusion of engineering. And so this has moved the science curriculum more and more toward a STEM type of focus. This is a clear attempt to integrate science and engineering and to do so within the context of the science class. This push toward integration is being seen most strongly in the early grades, particularly in elementary and middle school levels, although STEM is certainly being discussed in terms of integration all the way through throughout K-12 education. So my research team has been observing classrooms in grades 3, 4, and 5 across multiple school districts to see how districts are interpreting this idea of STEM and what kinds of instructional practices are going on. And so I want to share some findings from our studies with you. Number 1, the percent of schools where science was being taught declined from 70% to 30% when STEM was introduced. This sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but what we found is that science content was not being taught nearly as much when teachers were doing STEM activities. So what we saw, number 2, is science lessons were being replaced with STEM lessons for 70% of our participants. What this means is that people were doing engineering activities, maker spaces, working with Connects kits, Legos, robotics, coding activities. And this was taking place during science time as science instruction. Number 3, when teachers taught what they called STEM lessons, every single one of them in our study thought that the lesson integrated science and one of the other subject areas, such as engineering and technology. But not one of the lessons that we observed required students to learn or use the science idea. Most of the time, these were tinkering activities that were involving engineering or the production of a product For example, making a pinball machine out of cardboard. So in other words, engineering or these building tasks were being done instead of science. So why did this occur? We can only speculate at this point, but when we looked at these schools and districts, we noticed a few interesting things. First, some districts adopted engineering programs as their new science program without noticing that it had no science in it. Engineering programs will often claim that they are aligned to new science standards. And remember, the standards that seek integration of engineering into science. And what the readers don't often realize is that the engineering program claims to be aligned to the standards, but it's only aligned to the engineering part of the standards, not necessarily to the science part. So it's easy to look at curriculum materials and to say that they're standards aligned, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're science aligned, and science may be missing entirely. Some of these engineering programs are not at all designed to teach the science. In other words, some are modular and they expect that a school district will have a science program, and then these programs will plug into existing science units and they're designed to add on and add an engineering component to the science. What we saw in our study is that several of these districts adopted the engineering program thinking it was meeting the science standards, and it wasn't in there at all. Second is that some of these districts that we've studied perceive that if it's called STEM, it must be including the science. So if we use the acronym STEM, then that means that the activity is inherently teaching all four of these subject areas, or at least two of them. So in several places we saw the addition of a makerspace in the school, and if that makerspace was implemented and teachers were doing so-called STEM lessons in that makerspace, such as robotics or building tasks or coding tasks, they wrongly assumed that they were addressing the S in STEM, and sadly they weren't. Third, teachers in our study were very nervous about their science content knowledge. Most told us that they rarely or never receive professional development for science, and that they aren't confident in their understanding of the science concepts, and that they need more support. In fact, we actually gave the teachers in our study a grade 5 through 8 content exam, and they scored 63% on average. They're right about their hesitation. And this is consistent with nationwide data. Nationwide, about 36% of elementary teachers have had coursework across all three major content areas, including life science, physical science, and earth science. 15% of elementary teachers have never had professional development that's focused on science. 65% of elementary teachers report that they've had an average of fewer than 2 hours per year of professional development in science. One teacher in our study told us that she likes doing the engineering activities better than teaching science because it focuses on practices and design where there's no single right answer. So students can build something, have multiple ways of building this, and all of that can count as success. And she was nervous about having that science content knowledge and understanding of teaching those concepts. Science content's definitely challenging, and students do have many misconceptions, but that doesn't mean we need to skip the subject altogether. Now, to be fair to these teachers, integration of subject areas is a tremendously difficult challenge. Education has had a terrible historical track record, particularly in science, in integrating disciplines. We've done this before. The early 1990s, there was a call to integrate disciplines. What we found is that it's difficult because each of these subject matters has their own content, and it's structured around different organizing principles. And so the nature of engineering is not the same as the nature of science. The nature of science is not the same as the nature of mathematics. And so what happens in these integration efforts, and what we've seen in the past and what we're seeing now, is that one subject tends to predominate and be taught, and the other subjects are a token addition. They're pasted in. So for example, we see this a lot in engineering design challenges where children are asked to use a ruler. And then we say, look, we've incorporated mathematics because kids had to use a ruler. They had to measure something. But is that really integration of math and engineering? Are students meaningfully learning mathematics when they use a ruler in engineering? I think most of us would say no. They're applying a skill that they've learned in math. And so as a result, we see math continue to have space in the school day because mathematics is being taught as a conceptually focused discipline and then applied when doing the engineering activities. But unfortunately, science isn't being viewed the same way, and it should be. But science is being viewed as, if I've done this engineering activity and I mention the word force, I've taught forces. When in fact, we haven't taught forces. And so this is where some of that confusion is occurring. So what can we do? I don't want to paint an entirely negative picture here. There are things that we can do. So first, I recommend that we approach STEM with caution. We can't assume when we hear the word STEM that everybody is meaning the same thing. And so because there isn't a shared meaning of STEM, I recommend that we ask, what do you mean when you're using STEM? Number two, when you see STEM activities or schools or programs, ask yourself the following questions. First, what's this STEM activity or STEM school or STEM program really focused on? I want to show you a few examples. So in my field, the National Science Teachers Association is our primary professional association for science teachers. This is this month's journal, Science and Children, and it's all about the maker movement. And finding science in these activities is really difficult. And so one of the first things I do is I ask, what is this activity focused on? So here's an example from NSTA Reports. This is our quarterly magazine or newspaper, Building STEM Knowledge in a Breaker Space. And this is about taking apart common household appliances to see how they work. That's great, that's valuable, but the focus is on the technical construction of these devices, not science content. So I think we need to always say, what is this activity? First of all, what's it focused on? Second, are we assuming that the other subjects are being taught? So the fact that the National Science Teachers Association has all these activities and yet they don't have science in them, I find really intriguing. So are we assuming that because it comes from NSTA it teaches the science, or because it says STEM it addresses science, or mathematics for that matter? If we're assuming that it's being taught, take a good close look at it. What's being taught? Where? When? What's the conceptual integrity of that content? And third, when we see STEM activities, schools, or programs, I think we need to ask ourselves, is science disappearing from my classroom, from my school, from my district? So it's not that these activities are inherently bad, but the issue is we need to make a conscious choice about whether we're leaving science out of our curriculum inadvertently. Third, if we want to integrate STEM disciplines, I think we need to be realistic and consider what kind of integration model we want to use. Are we really expecting to fully teach concepts in multiple disciplines at the same time? If so, prepare for extensive planning and challenges along the way. Do let us know if you're successful. I'm not saying it can't be done, but doing so is extremely challenging. It's very rare. We would love to see successful attempts to teach 4 disciplines concurrently with integrity and the same time. That's really tough to do. Second, are you expecting to provide a context where students can see how math or science can be applied? So rather than trying to teach all of these together, maybe we're saying let's set up a context and apply knowledge that they've learned in these other subject matters. That's great, but just be aware that contexts are not by themselves teaching students the math or the science. My recommendation is that we maintain time in the school day for these subjects and consider the engineering design challenges or the technology activities as application experiences, not a replacement for math or science in the school day. Number 4, if you are in a position where you get to select curriculum or decide on standards, first, thank you, that's a tough job. And second, please, 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 on behalf of science education, ensure that science is not disappearing. Look for biology, geology, astronomy, physics, or chemistry concepts. Are they really being taught or simply mentioned? Building a foundation in science is crucial for students' future success in careers and STEM fields and being a knowledgeable citizen. If science is being shortchanged, make sure that we do something about that to make sure that we're teaching the science rather than assuming that the STEM activity is going to automatically address it. Number 5, if you're in a position to make or change policy, please be aware that elementary students may not be learning science at all in their schools. This is either due to STEM issues or due to the heavy influence of standardized testing. Even when we do have solid science standards in place for particular grade levels, if tests are high stakes, that subject may not be taught at all in grades where it's not being tested. If STEM is on the scene, science may be disappearing due to the excitement over maker spaces, engineering, and technology. I'm convinced that engineering and technology and even standards associated and the associated testing, I'm convinced that they were done with the best of intentions. These are all trying to open up doors for our students and help them see these wonderful career opportunities. But unfortunately, the consequences of these well-intentioned efforts, including standardized tests, have not been good for science instruction. And we need to make changes so that we can ensure that students have access to a high-quality science education. 6, if you're a curriculum developer or you work with STEM programs, my suggestion is to skip using the word STEM. I think we need to help clarify what we're really talking about, because right now this term STEM is very muddy and people will interpret it to mean whatever they want it to mean, and it is conflating these disciplines that are very distinct. They're connected, but they're very distinct disciplines. And so I think lumping them all under the name of STEM adds to the confusion. So I would rather see students doing an engineering design challenge and having the teacher call it an engineering design challenge, and helping them see how this activity is related to the work of real engineers. And then if we're using the mathematics in that challenge, tell students, notice we're using math in our engineering. If we're applying a science concept, notice we're using our science concepts here to do this, so that students learn the language of these disciplines and they learn what these disciplines are and how they interact with each other, rather than just calling it all STEM and hoping kids will learn something out of it. I think making those distinctions clear is going to help students a lot. It's going to help parents. It's going to help all of us. So in summary, there's nothing inherently wrong with including engineering and technology as part of children's school experiences. I think back to, my father was a machinist. Some of my greatest classes in high school were wood shop and graphic arts. These are valuable experiences for students. I think the issue, though, is that math and science are foundational disciplines that are heavily used by professional engineers and technologists, and building those foundations is important. So as we encounter the acronym STEM, let's step back from it and not assume that it's just automatically teaching all 4 of those disciplines. And let's look carefully at the experience and make really good decisions about what we're teaching, what we're not teaching, what we should be teaching, and what we want to teach. And I think that's going to help all of us, help students to have a better access to quality math and science, as well as engineering and technology education. Thanks so much.